Hello and welcome to another episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast, where it's not about getting the gig, it's about enjoying the gig. I'm your host, Tanner Guess, and this week I am joined by the saxophonist, entrepreneur, educator, and one-woman show dynamo, Erica von Kleist. And before we get into that, I want to take a second to thank everyone who supports the show. It's listeners like you, it's people telling their friends and family, it's those following us on social media at The Happy Musicians, using our hashtag Happy Musician, and especially those of you leaving ratings and reviews, which are the easiest, cheapest, and most efficient way to help us grow the podcast and reach new people. And if you leave a review, you have a chance to be featured on each episode, and you could be like Jazz Fan 206. Their review was, "I'm not a musician, but this podcast has been an interesting peek behind the curtain to see what life as a performer is like. The thoughtful interactions reveal little nuggets of wisdom that we can all benefit from. Please keep the positivity and good stuff coming." And it's going to keep coming. Don't you worry, Jazz Fan 206. It's coming right now. So, this week's interview. Erica von Kleist is super cool, and she had this Facebook post that went viral. Or I guess as viral as something can go in the jazz community. And we reference it a lot, and I'll have links to it in the show notes, and maybe you should just read it. But in essence, it was just her calling out a bunch of stuff that we've accepted as part of making it in this career field, and that's just crazy and super unhealthy. And she made the crazy decision a few years ago to leave New York and move to Montana, and now she's like super happy. And this was someone who was playing with the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra and Jazz at Lincoln Center, and for like younger musicians, it was someone who you'd think, oh, they're totally making it and they must be super successful and happy and financially stable. And she makes it clear that that just wasn't the case, and we tend to assume that people who are quote-unquote making it are well in life, and that's not really the case. And so a lot of this conversation is just asking questions of like, why are we doing it this way? And for me, that was really refreshing to hear someone at that level share these sentiments. And she also offers a lot of advice about actions we can take to be more happy and things that we can do to make this more sustainable and work for us. So I think it's a really cool conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. And please help me welcome Erica von Kleist. Hi, Erica von Kleist. Welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is exciting. I had seen this Facebook post from you right around the time I had started the show, and to hear similar thoughts coming from someone who was established in New York and doing the thing that a lot of us think we're supposed to do in the jazz world, and then to see that you had left and moved to Montana and were emphasizing mental health now, it was just all super cool. And so to get to have you on the show now is really exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So maybe what we should do is set the stage for this big move for you and what went into it. And maybe the best way to do that would be to give a quick rundown of what your career looked like up until around the point that you decided to leave New York.
Okay. Well, I kind of want to preface this by saying that I'm eternally grateful for my time in New York, and New York is an awesome place. So, people are very, very sensitive and prideful about where they live, and they should be, because, it's their home. So, New York is great. But I remember, so after I graduated Juilliard, I hit the ground running in a career in music, and I was touring with the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra and going on the road with Lincoln Center, doing a lot of big band gigs, which was fun and wonderful. But it was like constant, it was just, I was burning out. because, it was great to have a gig with these bands, but the work is not constant. So you have to like get a bunch, you have to get teaching work. You have to do wedding gigs. You have to do 8 million other things. And in a city where everything is so saturated and it's so impossible to get anywhere, it just really started wearing on me. Just schlepping 7 horns on my back to go to the union, to have a rehearsal for a gig that paid $30. I think I probably mentioned that exact quote in my post. And, it's just, I felt like I was just beating my body up and my mind for an art form that I loved, but I don't know, it was just so, everything was hard. Everything I was doing was hard. And when that happens, things are just not fun anymore. And I got to a point where I'd show up for gigs and rehearsals. And, of course, I would love the people I was working with and the bands I was in, but I was just so dark and just so in such a bad mood. And it wasn't about the music for me anymore. It was like, when is this rehearsal over so I can, like, beat the traffic to get home and not have to have my horns on my back? And I thought to myself, this is no way to live. And basically what happened was I got a call to do an orchestra pit gig with the Alpine Theater Project, which is a great theater company here in Whitefish, Montana. And they needed a reed player to play on Little Shop of Horrors. And I had done a Broadway show. I had done Addams Family on Broadway, and which is 8 shows a week, huge, taxing, very, very, demanding career to do that. But they wanted me to come out to do Little Shop. And so I did. And this month was like, the month that I was there was like, it was like summer camp. And I had never had summer camp in my entire life. Like even in high school, like when I actually took summer school classes, not because I wasn't passing my classes, but it was so that I could get ahead to do an AP class the next year. So like I spent my summers in school doing biology and algebra 3-4. So I never had given myself a break ever in my life, because there had just been so much drive and pressure to be a jazz musician and do this thing. And so when I got to Montana for this month, I was like, oh my God, the air is so clean. There's no traffic. I'm living in a condo on the top of a ski mountain, and the view is incredible. The pay was not necessarily New York level pay, but I didn't care. I mean, the beer was cheap. We were cooking out every single night and lighting off fireworks in the street and doing the stuff that like you do when you're a kid. And I never had that because of this constant like pressure and drive to achieve and to be there for the art form. And it was just an eye-opening experience for me. And I thought, this was like a window into how life could be. And I figured, well, if I'm going to be a poor musician, because I was not making much money in New York at all, scraping by, I might as well live someplace beautiful. So I decided to move to Montana.
Yeah, that is so cool. And I'm from Salt Lake City originally, so I know that kind of part of the country and how beautiful it is.
And the air is just so crisp and clean. And I mean, I'm sure there's traffic near Salt Lake, but where I am, I mean, people start getting up in arms if they have to wait through more than one red light, I'm like, oh my God, you should drive on the BQE and then come back and see how amazing this is. So yeah, it's a definite perspective shift for sure.
Right. Well, one thing you had mentioned was how when you leave school, you're just kind of on this ambiguous quest of getting to play with one big name every once in a while that you put on your resume. And then you're back into having a few months off from not having work. And it just seems like too often music career can be really aimless. You're just kind of waiting for
Mm-hmm.
whatever opportunity is coming your way. And it seems like you have the ability now to really do the things that you want to do in Montana.
It is. I mean, I had to figure out what that was, honestly. Um, and so, like, okay, so I guess going back to the post, the Facebook post that I wrote that kind of went viral about, mental health and preparedness in the jazz community. We're not taught about your life, your future life. We're not taught what to expect. We're not taught how to go about having a career in this. I mean, to be fair, there's no one path that anyone should take. Really the sky's the limit, which is the beauty of working in the arts. But for students these days, and still to this day, are left continually with so little information when they graduate about how to conduct themselves in a business-minded way, how to understand themselves as people. Like, hey, if you don't want to play jazz, that's okay. Like, I just felt like that wasn't okay when I was in school. I mean, I did go to Juilliard. So Juilliard is very intense and very focused and very, focused on this one thing. And there's this whole world out there. And I feel like had like some mentors come to me in college with like a come to Jesus kind of conversation about this is what this life is like, I would have felt a little bit better about myself, maybe as an artist trying to make it when I couldn't pay rent, because even like the greatest musicians out there who we like revere when we're growing up in these jazz programs, they're not necessarily making it. I mean, there's older musicians out there, I see GoFundMe accounts for them to like pay their medical bills because they couldn't afford health insurance. And these are like musicians who are freaking transcribing in college. Yeah. So like, I just wish that the reality of this business were laid out for us as young people, because like we'd had a whole lot more power, feel a little more empowered about like how we can put our creativity, like as much creativity as we put behind our music, we need to put behind ourselves and our career. And I just feel like that's a major, major hole in music education in this day and age. And, my generation of college students definitely has paid the price for that, because I know a lot of people my age and slightly older and younger feel the same way. So I hope that it's a bit of a tangent, but I hope that sort of was around what you were asking about.
Yeah, that's super true. And I don't know, I think maybe that it's because music is so accessible to everyone and people are contributing new music so easily now that like things are evolving very quickly because of modern technology, and maybe universities felt the need to really double down on what we might call like traditional or like the bebop material of jazz music, and as a way to preserve it. But in doing so, I think so many students who aren't really into that get burnt out trying to get really good at it because they think that's what you need to do. And it doesn't seem like there are many programs that try to help you figure out what you really like and then help you get really good and figure out how to monetize that and distribute that to people. It's normally, we're going to put you into this mold of a jazz musician.
And like, what's the mold? Like, I just want to know, like, philosophically what jazz education is trying to create. And, like, what are the important skills that students need to have coming out of college. And I want like universities and colleges to actually dial that in and figure out what they think that is, and then present that to some professionals who have been out of college for 15, 20, 30 years and be like, okay, those are fine, but like your students are not going to know how to pay how taxes work. Your students are not going to know what the word marketing means. Your students aren't going to know how a contract works. And just basic economic concepts like supply and demand and net versus gross and how ticket sales work and how a nonprofit functions, like what's a board of directors. I mean, like all of this stuff completely impacts everything that they're going to do gig-wise. And they need to be focused on the gig and being great technicians for sure. But there's this whole other world of life out there that is greatly going to impact whether or not they're successful in that. And that's the part of education that failed me when I was growing up. And that's like one of my big missions right now is to be teaching this at colleges and like give these kids a little wake-up call and empower them and let them know that, like, look, the music industry is completely topsy-turvy right now. Mm-hmm. Like, nobody's making money off of records. I mean, it's the emperor's new clothes. Like, you get a record deal. It's like, well, that's really cool. But, like, how are these labels making any money? So it's like this antiquated business model that we still somehow believe in when the world is changing so fast. And I feel like music programs in schools are just not changing fast enough to keep up. And the students are paying the price. So, yeah, I just think that there's way, way, way more that can be done. And it needs to be done fast.
Yeah. Well, and I really like the idea of a program articulating to you what they hope you get out of it. Because at IU, I had a great experience and I learned a lot, but I don't think anyone ever said to me, like, this is what we hope you gain from this. And maybe the reason they didn't is they didn't have something in mind of, like, what are we trying to create other than just, like, a killing group of musicians, you know?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, it's great to get a degree in music performance, but, like, you know, where are you going to go with that? I mean, I was very, very lucky when I got out of Juilliard that I had a gig. And after Latin Jazz Orchestra was working and we were doing some tours, it was just enough for me to pay my bills. And then, a couple other things would come in here and there. But I've been very, very fortunate in that I've never had to have a job doing anything other than music. Not like a job in something other than music is a bad job. I know plenty of people who are bartenders and also musicians and, work behind a desk for, 20 hours a week. That's awesome. But for me, my life has been geared towards music, and I've been able to do that as my main source of employment for my whole life, which has been great. But man, it's interesting. Like, I was just at University of Pittsburgh. I did an entrepreneurship sort of talk there, and there was a student there who's a saxophone player, and I introduced myself to him, and he's like, oh, I know who you are, Erica. I know, I've heard all your albums, and like that's really flattering that a student has heard my name and respects me as a musician, and I'm very thankful for that. But I'm like, okay, you're exactly the kid I want to talk to, because you probably think that I'm like making it financially, I'm one of those musicians who you are looking up to. And in the reality of everything, a lot of musicians that you look up to are all struggling to make it financially. And like, I don't want to give these young musicians some false sense of like, my life is amazing and everything's awesome and I've totally got this all down. And like, I want them to know that our industry is in crisis and we're not making money and we're struggling and they're about to sign up for this. So how can we fix that? And I think there's someone out there who is going to come up with a solution. And I think that they are in the younger generation. And they just need to know where the problems lie in order to know how to fix them. And if we have kids coming out of college who don't know that their road ahead is full of potholes, then they're not going to know how to fix them. So I don't know. I just don't want young people to be in the same boat where they're completely burnt out and hating the music like I was before I moved to Montana. And because that's like, then the music is just going to suffer at that point. So I'm a big advocate for teaching this in colleges.
Yeah. And well, I guess I know. So Dave Stryker teaches at IU, and he would always say, you know, guys, like if you stick with this, you can make hundreds in this industry. Was like one of his go-to jokes. And I say that because I feel like teachers go about talking about the struggles of the career and how there isn't that much money in kind of this really negative and not upfront way, or I guess an ambiguous way, and that like, oh, you know, like this is going to be really hard, like there's not a lot of money, but they don't say like specifically, you know, honestly, like I'm at this level and I'm making this much, you know. When I was your age getting out of school, I was making this much money. There's very little clarity in that whole issue. People don't tell it to you straight. And I think because of that, I got the impression in school that like, oh, well, I just have to work harder and be smarter about it and come up with something new. And then that leads you to feeling like it's your fault, but it's really just the system that isn't working.
Yeah, I think, the whole thing of just like working harder, you know, and like, well, you got to pay your dues. That's another really detrimental like mindset to have. I mean, yes, this is the arts. You're going to do a gig for free every once in a while, but like, at what point do you stop paying your dues? At what point do you stop paying your dues when your bank account is like, when your proverbial bank account is depleted? Like, what does it mean to pay your dues? I mean, do we have kids coming out of finance degrees having to pay their dues and work for free? No, they're coming out and having a job that pays maybe not quite six figures, but, you know, by the time they're 25, they own a house and have health insurance. And I mean, why is there this mentality of like self-deprecation and martyrism in jazz? You know, like why do we think that is the way it has to be? And I think once we turn our mentality around and start like realizing, wow, we can't be teaching our students like it's, you know, it's just hard, it's just the way it is. Well, if you believe that, then it's going to be hard, right? But if you don't accept that and you won't accept that, then you'll put yourself on a path of like empowerment and believing in yourself. So that's what I believe in, because that's really what happened to me when I left New York, came to Montana, and I was like, I can do whatever I want. So I started 2 companies here. That was success. I have 3 major projects that I'm promoting. They're all mine. I have complete creative control over everything. And, you know, I've learned a lot about business being in a small valley and trying to make it. And I've basically gotten this education here that I never would have gotten had I stayed in the city.
Yeah. Well, and I first of all love the phrase like you can still play jazz and not have to be a martyr for it. Or you could substitute any music in there. I think that's a really important message. But your whole move to Montana and now helping to grow a smaller music scene and creating these companies is so cool because it's something I talk about on the podcast a lot. This idea of like a grassroots approach to building the music economy and scene all over the country so that it doesn't become this feeding frenzy in the same like 4 big cities. where it becomes oversaturated and people are undercutting each other, playing for less pay just to have a gig. If we had legitimate gigging scenes all over the country, there would be less pressure to go like kill yourself trying to make it in one of these places.
Right. It's interesting. So when I wrote the Facebook post, I was in New York, and this was in the fall, and I had a really, really rough year last year, and I needed to get out of Montana for a few months and just reset myself. And I thought, oh, you know what? I'll just go back to New York for a couple of months and rekindle some friendships and go see some great shows. And, you know, I went there with no intention of doing really any work. But I had actually booked a couple shows for my one-woman comedy show that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like all four of the shows that I had booked got canceled when I was there, which is a testament to how New York works and how supportive they are of like new shows. And like, I got super, super depressed. And that's when I wrote this post. It's because I was just all of those memories of being back in that place of martyrism where it's like, you know, you're killing yourself trying to make something happen. And it's to your own physical and mental detriment. And I was doing it again. And that's when I was like, we need to stop this. This is not how it should be. And this is, you know, and if this is how it is, this is no way to live. And, yeah, that's, I'm just kind of, there's a balance that you have to strike between sacrificing for what you do, you know, because if you sacrifice too much, you're just going to lose yourself and you're not going to be happy. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah. And, well, I want to move on to maybe some more solution-based discussion and also talk about your one-woman show. But one more thing I wanted to ask you about the post in particular, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I've been curious about it. And you, in one sentence, you say, one thing we rarely talk about in the jazz community is mental health, and you have rarely italicized or starred off. And I was wondering what you meant by that.
Like, this conversation about just the state of our industry and how of the state of our own brains in this industry is not a topic of conversation that came up. And if it did, it always resulted in, well, gotta pay the dues. Well, you know, I got some good gigs coming up, so it's okay, you know, or, well, you know, it's like there's always something that is you know, is like a deflection from how you're feeling. Like I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like we just never would talk about, like, this sucks. Why are we doing this? Right? It was never like that. Like, we never had those conversations. And that's why I say we rarely talk about this, especially with such candor and objectivity. And I think the reason I can talk about it is because I've left the scene and I see it from a different perspective. And I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm saying this is what I see. And I see that there are things that we don't talk about, that we need to talk about our mental health and how we approach this art form and what we do, because this art form is not going to survive if we push ourselves to the limit and ignore our own personal happiness.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to talk about, well, yeah, let's talk about your one-woman show.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll let you introduce it.
Okay. So in my quest for economic stability, 2 years ago, I applied for a job here locally in the Flathead Valley of Montana, which is where I live. And it was for an administrative job at an arts organization. And, you know, not to toot my own horn, but I have some pretty solid credentials. My resume speaks for itself. and it was a job with a salary. And I was like, I could use that right now. It would be nice to have some stability. But I got one of those emails back that was like, thank you for your time and have a nice day. And I thought, wait a second. So I called all my references that I'd given. I said, hey, did these people call you? And they said no. And I have reason to believe that they never even looked at my application. And this organization is run by people who are in the older generation, most of whom are men and most of whom are white. And we all know in this day and age that there's like a mental block against wanting to work with a strong, progressive, imaginative, woman who has her stuff together and who would probably enact change within the organization. And I was like, I did not get this job because I did not get this interview because I'm a woman. And I knew that that was it. And I just got really, really mad. And I have dealt with sexism in my industry my entire life, and I've never really made a big deal about it. But this particular instance was so egregious that I was like, either I'm going to go on a Facebook rant about it in my small, tiny valley and probably burn some bridges, or I'm going to write some music. So I figured I'll write some music and see what happens. So I started writing music with words that I had never written music with words before, ever. And the first song I wrote was about mansplaining. And it was really funny and very raw and candid. And I started playing it on piano and singing it for friends, which I was nervous to do, which I'd never done before. My friends were like, that's really funny. And I was like, it is? So then I started writing more songs just about women's issues. That translated into a full-blown musical that I wrote. And I did a reading in Whitefish. I brought the show to New York and did a reading with an all-Broadway cast. And it was really well received. The working title was Boobs, the musical. But I've come to find out that there was already a Boobs musical, so I have to work on the title. But it's all about women's issues. And the producers who saw the show were like, this is great, Erica, but you should try doing this as a one-woman show and perform it yourself. And I was like, really? No, I'm in the pit. I'm backstage. I'm not meant to be on stage. They said, well, you should try it. So I took their advice to heart. And last fall, I debuted my show. I call it Boobs with Erica von Kleist. And it's not a musical at all. It's basically musical comedy, like what Tim Minchin does. I call it like the love child of Tim Minchin and Amy Schumer. And it's all my songs about the stuff that we don't talk about women's issues. Like, for instance, I have a song about getting your period called You're Becoming a Woman, but Let's Not Talk About It, because we don't talk about it. I have a song called Boobs that's about two guys talking about a woman's boobs behind her back, which happened to me on numerous occasions. I have a song called 78% about the income disparity. I have a song about selfies. I've got I'm just kind of calling it all out. And yeah, so I started doing this one-woman show, and it has been super successful anywhere I've brought it. I haven't done a ton of shows, but I'm on the cusp of bringing this thing out to some bigger venues, and I'm just really excited about it. And it's really funny. It's resonating with people. I'm getting fan art. People are sending me fan art from my show.
Man.
Like cross stitch of boobs, or a knitted hat that says boobs on it. It's just hilarious. And it's I was in college, and you told me, yeah, you'd be living in Montana and you'd be writing a one-woman musical comedy act called Boobs. I'd be like, you're crazy. And here I am, and I have nothing to lose, and I'm really excited about it. And so this is my new thing.
That is so awesome. Well, and it's a big, I guess it would be funny for some people to think that this Juilliard-trained saxophonist is now doing one-woman comedy show singing and playing piano. And was that kind of taking on this new role, is it uncomfortable for you at all, or does it feel really natural at this point?
It was uncomfortable. Well, it was uncomfortable clearing the hurdle of singing in front of people, because singing is not something I'd ever done before. And even if you're a very, well-traveled musician, just the thought of singing in front of people for these instrumentalists is like strikes the fear of God. It's like, oh my God, I can't sing in front of people. And so I was kind of like that. And then, I would do it in front of trusted people who weren't going to who I just felt comfortable around. And then slowly that spiraled out to now I'm not afraid of it. And then also I kind of went through a period where sort of an identity crisis where, we were talking about, there's that pressure to be a jazz musician and you have a jazz identity and this is who you are. And I thought, what are my colleagues going to think? What is the jazz team going to think about me breaking out and doing a musical comedy act? And I'm not playing jazz chords on any of these songs. I mean, this is pop. This is comedy pop. And I thought, man, is this the kiss of death for my jazz career? And I was like, you know what? No, it's not, because I can still do all of that. And this is just another aspect of who I am. And I don't want to go through life not knowing what could have happened with this material, because I was afraid. So that was, I kind of shed all of those fears and those reservations. And now I'm full steam ahead. I have nothing to lose, honestly. I look at it, I have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Might as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen videos of it and it's super entertaining, and you can tell just watching how much fun you're having. And that's not something that you can always say from a jazz performance.
Yeah. What I've learned being away from New York and particularly being in Montana, in a location that is very supportive of live music, and there's all different kind of music, different kinds of shows and stuff that come through here. People want to go out and have fun when they go out. When they go buy a ticket for something, in general, people want to be taken away from their lives. They just want joy. And so much of jazz is very intellectual, like what we're teaching our kids in colleges. And I think we've lost touch of that sort of visceral connection to joy and communication with our audiences. Because, it's not, I don't want to say college jazz programs aren't joyful, but it's a task. You have to be in this class, and you have to be on this performance, and you have to get your credits, and you have to do that. And all of that is good. It keeps you on track, but at the same time, we're losing the why. We're losing the why. Why are we doing this? Why did jazz become a thing? And it's because it was joyful for people. People went out into the clubs and were raucous. And anyway, anything that I do now, for me, I want it to be joyful and connecting with audiences. And I think that's why this show is resonating with people. I mean, it's sort of like the perfect marriage. When you have music and comedy together, you can get a message across really strongly. And when you have people laughing at what you're saying, and what you're saying is truth, then it's like people are then resonating with what you're saying. And I'm just sort of reconnecting with that joy. And I think that that's really important, especially of us in the jazz world. We have to remember that.
Yeah. And do you think that, well, I mean, you've turned out okay, but do you think that if you had prioritized joy earlier on that you would still be in the place that you are now? Like, do you wish you had done that earlier, or was the process of going through the fire worth it for the growth that came from it?
I mean, it's hard to look back on your life and be like, oh, I wish I could go back 10 years and change everything. I mean, there's some people who say that, but I don't, because, I went through the fire. I hit emotional rock bottom. I mean, I was not mentally well in my 20s. And now I feel great, and I feel empowered, and I feel like that pendulum swing within me is what is propelling my music. And like I said, I have nothing to lose but to put joyful, impactful music out in front of in front of an audience. And like, my worst case scenario is like, my show doesn't work, the book that I wrote totally tanks, and the album I'm releasing this month totally does not go anywhere. Like, the worst case scenario is that happens, and then I end up teaching private lessons out of my home in beautiful Whitefish, Montana. Like, that's my plan B. And I mean, that's a pretty awesome plan B. And so I'm like, bringing great music to people and believing in it and believing in yourself unconditionally behind it is a winning combination, because people will resonate with that, and they will sense that. If you believe in what you're selling and you love what you're selling, people are going to buy it. But if you're like burnt out and sad and frustrated and not having any fun, people aren't going to buy that. So I came from that to this, and I'm just way happier.
Yeah. And I guess my question could be better put in that there's this general accepted trope of the tortured artist, and that's just part of the terrain with choosing this career path. And do you think that young musicians starting out on this journey, if they embraced joy and beauty and trying to have fun and mental health early on, do you think that that's a better way to serve your career and grow? Or is that actually just something that you have to go through?
Well, I guess I look at it this way. If you want to be a tortured artist, if you think you are a tortured artist, then be a tortured artist. That's okay. There's beautiful music that can come from that. If you don't want to be a tortured artist, you can be a happy, joyful artist and bring joy into your life and having a good outlook and a good perspective, and understand that there's a whole world out there, and there are so many different ways that you can form a career. You don't have to be a tortured artist. But what I don't want is, I don't want institutions, and I'm not talking necessarily educational institutions, but just the institution of jazz, to be teaching people that you are a tortured artist. That's what you're signing up for. You have to pay your dues. You have to, it just sucks sometimes. And to be teaching our young people that's what's going to kill it for us. So we need to let people know that they have a choice, and there's a life outside of being a tortured artist. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. That's fantastic.
It's all about choice. Like, you can choose how you live your life. You can choose how you approach music. You can choose not to even play music anymore. I mean, honestly, when I moved to Montana, I took a year off, and I just hung out for a year, and I didn't do anything. I didn't pick up my horn. I put my horn down for like 6 months, and I just needed to clean the slate, because I'm like, if this is going to feel so terrible when I put my horn in my face, it's not worth doing it. And I would just want young people to know that if you feel stressed or bad, or, like you're spinning your wheels doing what you're doing, like, put it down. It's okay to put it down for a while. That doesn't make you a failure. Like, you don't have to be a martyr for this. You don't have to push yourself all the time. You know, you have to be good at what you do if you want to make it in whatever you're doing. You have to practice and you have to push yourself. I mean, not every day is a piece of cake. But, like, you know, if life gets to that point, then put it down and, like, re-examine. And it doesn't, you know, that's not your be-all, end-all life. You can have a life outside of that. So that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. Since I'm feeling a little under the weather, I'm kind of running out of steam here, and I can tell my voice is kind of starting to go. Are there other things that you feel like are really important that we should hit that we haven't gotten to yet?
Well, if I can do some shameless self-promotion.
Oh, we'll definitely do that. That's of course.
I have an album coming out on March 27th with my project with DeWitt Fleming Jr. We call ourselves Sax and Taps. And our album is called Intersplosion. And we've recorded live at Dizzy's Club in New York with an incredible band, and that's coming out on March 27th. So look for it on iTunes and Spotify, and, you know, check back on, you know, my social media. It's all going to be on there. It's an incredible, super swinging, very joyful, very honest album, and we had a great time doing it. That's coming out. And then I also have a music theory book that I released a few months ago called A Cool Approach to Jazz Theory. And it's a book that is designed for middle and high school jazz band students who want to learn how to solo, basically teaches them what chord symbols mean and how to practice them on your instrument. And this book has been great for band directors who don't have the time to teach theory. And it's also great for adults and college students, too. So it's available. There's a link on my website, ericavonkleist.com, but if you also go to bookbaby.com and Google A Cool Approach to Jazz Theory, you'll find it there and you can order it. And it's an awesome book. I think you should check it out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time. I'm sorry you're under the weather.
No, it's all good. I'm really glad we were able to make this work. It meant a lot to me, and I got so much out of this conversation. All right, that does it for this week's episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast. The feature track is the new single off of the new record that Erica just mentioned, and the track is Piggy Bank for Charity. It's a super awesome record. I'm excited for it to drop, and you can find links to it and everything else that we mentioned in the podcast in the show notes. So you can check it out. You can go to our website, thehappymusicians.com, to see all those and lists of the actionable advice that guests share and an archive of all the episodes we've done so far. So I encourage you to check that out. Follow us on social media at The Happy Musicians. Hashtag Happy Musician on your posts, and leave a rating and review if you can. It's free. It's super easy, takes only a few minutes to do, and it makes a huge difference. All right, I'm going to stop plugging. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We've got more good stuff coming this month, and we just appreciate you taking the time and energy and attention to listen to these. Hope you're enjoying, and as always, stay happy.